So today we shall be talking about complications of the diabetes. So basically diabetes can complicate all the organs of the body. Some of them are such which take long time, which develop slowly, and whereas there are certain such complications where you have limited time in your hand. For example, falling down of blood sugar, hypoglycemia, it's an emergency. And similarly, quite often we come across patients having ketoacidosis. So today I shall be highlighting some relevant points about the diabetic ketoacidosis. So what is the definition? It is the acute life-threatening but reversible. Though it is life-threatening, but it is reversible complication of diabetes, both diabetes type 1 whereas diabetes type 2, both of them can get affected because of the diabetic ketoacidosis. And there is severe hyperglycemia. What results in diabetic ketoacidosis is severe hyperglycemia. So it is a state of absolute or relative insulin deficiency aggravated by ensuing hyperglycemia, dehydration, acidosis, producing derangements in intermediary metabolism. So the patient suffering from diabetic ketoacidosis will present like a patient who normally has a state of dehydration. That is how you will come across. The clinical presentation will be like that. The lab definition is glucose more than 250 to 600 milligram per deciliter, arterial pH between 6.8 to 7.3. There is the anion gap increases and plasma ketones are 4 plus, that is more than 5 milliequivalents per liter. Now what is the pathophysiology of diabetic ketoacidosis? So diabetic ketoacidosis results from relative or absolute insulin deficiency combined with counter-regulatory hormone excess. So what hormones they are in excess is the glucagon, cortisol and growth hormone. Both insulin deficiency and glucagon excess is necessary for DKA. So the pathophysiology, to understand the pathophysiology, you see what does insulin do? It results in lipolysis. There is plasma free fatty acid which is increased, resulting in hepatic free fatty acid, and this increased fatty acids in the blood lead to ketosis. And glucagon, that also increases, the increase in glucagon will result in keratinate acetyl transferase, increased keratinate palmitoyl transferase and free fatty acid oxidation. So both these things they result in ketoacidosis. The other effect will be glycolysis by diminished insulin, and increased glucagon will result in gluconeogenesis. It diminishes the uptake by GLUT4. So this results in hyperglycemia. So there is one mechanism which is responsible for producing ketones, and the other mechanism which is responsible for producing a hyperglycemic state. And what will be the effect of hyperglycemic state? It will result in osmotic diuresis, there will be volume depletion and resulting in dehydration. So this leads to disturbance in physiological processes. Glucose utilization diminished glucose utilization results in hyperglycemia, proteolysis, is breakdown of amino acids, glutamine, alanine, is lipolysis and glycogenolysis, breakdown of muscle glycogen, lactate. Gluconeogenesis, glutamine and alanine, glycerol, lactate are the precursor. So volume depletion there is osmotic diuresis, which results in volume depletion and dehydration. Whereas in muscle, there is breakdown of the muscle to produce more glucose, and which ultimately again results in dehydration and increase in the blood glucose. And in the liver, there is breakdown of fatty acids, which results in formation of the ketone bodies. So triggering factors. What actually triggers the diabetic ketoacidosis? Infections. Usually whenever you come across a patient suffering from diabetic ketoacidosis, our first aim is definitely to manage the ketoacidosis, but we have to explore what must have resulted in this condition. So one of the common thing which you need to explore is look for presence of infection. So you have to look for infection. The common infections are pneumonia and urinary tract infection. They are most commonly responsible for causing diabetic ketoacidosis. Then inadequate use of insulin. So you can call it either there is non-compliance, or he takes it for granted that I am taking insulin and my blood sugar is normal, and your patient does not bother in spite of proper compliance. It is not bothering to keep a watch. Then also in that situation also he can get hyperglycemia. And emotional stress. Emotional stress can also results in secretion of various hormones, and it disturbs the glucose metabolism. Then some of the drugs that too disturb the glucose metabolism, that can also trigger the diabetic ketoacidosis, and amongst them we have corticosteroids, antihistamines, thiazide diuretics, and then pancreatitis. So whenever you come across a patient suffering from hyperglycemia, besides managing the hyperglycemic state, we have to look for these factors and identify if anything of this is responsible, then we have to treat that also. Now what will be the symptoms of diabetic ketoacidosis? Classic symptoms of hyperglycemia: polyuria, polydipsia, weight loss, thirst. Other symptoms are weakness, malaise, lethargy. And they may also have nausea, vomiting, and abdominal pain. The consciousness is disturbed. He may be confused, or he may be semi-comatose, or he might be in the coma. So symptoms of underlying infections, as we have to look for them. General signs will be ill appearance. If you look at the patient, you will find that as if he is ill for a pretty long time. And as I said, the level of consciousness varies. He may be comatose, he may be semi-comatose, he may be confused. Then you will definitely find signs of dehydration. So skin will be dry, hot, flushed, loss of skin structure is there. If you look at the tongue, you will find it dry, eyes are sunken, and dark circles around the eyes can be seen. The vital signs will be tachycardia, hypotension, tachypnea. Now specific signs. Normally you do not have any peculiar smell in the breath, but in diabetic patients you will have a ketotic breath, and the respiration is deep and rapid, and there can be abdominal tenderness. And now we will take into consideration the symptoms of acidosis. So acidosis will result in, the central effect will be headache, sleepiness, confusion, loss of consciousness, coma. The respiratory system will have shortness of breath, coughing because of the acidosis. The cardiac effects will be arrhythmias, increased heart rate, tachycardia as we said. Then it will also affect the muscles. So muscles, you may have seizures and weakness. In the GI, it can cause nausea and vomiting, and one may have diarrhea. So these are the symptoms of acidosis. you can very well see the various things just we talked about. Now, how are we going to diagnose? So, diagnosis is not very difficult. Whenever you have to first suspect, always think whenever you are coming across a patient, diabetic patient coming in comatose state, you have to think that I have to rule out the possibility of diabetic ketoacidosis. So, suspect DKA if patient presents with dehydration. If he is having dehydration, there is acidotic breathing, abdominal pain or distension, vomiting and altered mental status. If these things are there, you should suspect DKA. High WCC may be seen in absence of infections. Blood urea nitrogen may be elevated with pre-renal azotemia secondary to dehydration. Creatinine in some assays may cross react with ketone bodies, so it may not reflect true renal function. Now, serum amylase is often raised, and when there is abdominal pain, a diagnosis of pancreatitis may mistakenly be made. Now, how are we going to manage the patient suffering from hyperglycemia or diabetic ketoacidosis? So, after having confirmed the diagnosis by finding high plasma glucose, positive serum ketones, metabolic acidosis, you have to admit the patient. You should be admitted in intensive care. Maybe necessary, it is necessary most of the time for monitoring, and if pH is less than 7 or patient is comatose, then you have to put the patient in intensive care unit. Then we are going to assess. What are we going to assess is serum electrolytes, acid base status, renal functions, creatinine, urine output. Then we have to replace the fluid. Because the patient is dehydrated, definitely we will have to replace the fluid. So, how are we going to manage this patient? You have to give nearly 2 to 3 liters of normal saline over first 1 to 3 hours. So, it will be approximately 10 to 20 ml per kilogram per hour. Subsequently, we can reduce the strength of normal saline and it will be 250 to 500 ml per hour, changing to glucose and 0.5% saline at 150 to 200 ml per hour when plasma glucose reaches 250 milligram per deciliter. So, our aim is to bring down plasma glucose to nearly 250 milliliter, and initially we give saline, then we have to reduce the strength of saline, and if required we have to add glucose also, because we do not want to straightforward achieve the normal glycemic status. So 250 gram is ideal. And that is why it is very important when and to administer insulin. So, administer short acting regular insulin, IV 0.1 unit per kilogram, then 0.1 unit per kilogram per hour by continuous IV infusion. So, you have to start IV infusion at the rate of 0.1 unit per kilogram, increase to 2 to 3 folds if no response is obtained by within 2 to 4 hours. If the initial serum potassium is more than 3.3 millimoles, do not administer insulin until potassium is corrected, because if the potassium is already low and we will start administering insulin, it will further shift it in the intracellular space. That is not desirable. So, unless and until we correct the potassium, we will not administer insulin. So, assess the patient. What precipitated the episode? Non-compliance, infection, trauma, pregnancy, any infarct, or is he consuming any drug? So, initiate appropriate workup for precipitating events. So, you can go for blood cultures, X-rays, ECGs. Then you have to measure capillary blood glucose every 1 to 2 hours. Major electrolytes, especially potassium bicarbonate phosphate and anion gap every 4 hours for first 24 hours. Monitor blood pressure, pulse, respiration, mental status, fluid intake and output every 1 to 4 hours. So replace potassium 10 milliequivalents per hour when plasma potassium is less than 5 to 5.2 or 20 to 30 milliequivalents per liter of infusion. If the ECG is normal, urine flow and normal creatinine is documented, administer 40 to 80 milliequivalents per hour. When plasma potassium is less than 3.5 or if the bicarbonate is given, if initial serum potassium is more than 5.2, do not supplement potassium until the potassium is corrected. Continue above until the patient is stable. Our aim is 8.3 to 11.1 millimole per liter. 150 to 200 milligram per, this will be in milligrams, and acidosis is resolved. The insulin infusion may be decreased to 0.2 to 0.1 unit. Administer long acting insulin in patient, if patient is eating. Allow for a 2 to 4 hour overlap in insulin infusion, and subcutaneous long acting insulin injection can be allowed. So management is primary assessment, volume status, degree of dehydration, blood pressure, degree of consciousness, degree of acidosis and precipitating disease. So how are we going to assess the volume status? After the initial bolus of normal saline, replacement of the sodium and free water deficit is carried out over the next 24 hours. When the hemodynamic stability and adequate urine outputs are achieved, IV fluids should be switched to 0.45%, means you have to go hypotonic saline depending on the calculated volume deficit. The change to 0.45% saline helps to reduce the trend towards hyperchloremia later in the course of decay. Alternatively, initial use of lactate linger IV solution may reduce hyperchloremia that commonly occurs with normal saline. So this is about the volume status. Then the management of hyperglycemia. How are we going to manage the hyperglycemia? A bolus of IV 0.1 unit per kilogram followed by short acting regular insulin is usually administered immediately. It is administered immediately and subsequently we will start the infusion, and subsequent treatment should provide continuous and adequate level of circulating insulin. IV administration is usually preferred. 0.1 unit per kilogram of regular insulin per hour, because it ensures rapid distribution and allows adjustment of infusion rate as the patient responds to therapy. So you can either increase or decrease the rate of the insulin infusion depending upon the patient's response. DKA can also be treated with subcutaneous short acting insulin analogs. IV regular insulin should be continued until the acidosis resolves and the patient is metabolically stable. As the acidosis and insulin resistance associated with DKA resolve, the insulin infusion rate can be decreased. Here we have to further decrease the rate of insulin by, it can come down to 0.02 to 0.01 units per kilogram per hour. So initially it was 0.1. Long acting insulin in combination with short acting should be administered as soon as the patient resumes eating, because this facilitates transition to an outpatient insulin regime and reduces the length of hospital stay. So ongoing monitoring will be, what are you going to monitor when the patient is under your care? So hourly blood glucose estimation, electrolyte and pH every 4 hours, urine for glucose and ketone every 4 hours, and normal urine output whether you are receiving getting the desired amount of output, and clinical signs of rehydration, because you have received the patient in the state of dehydration, so you have to look for whether he is showing now signs of rehydration. The another important thing is potassium correction. So potassium stores are depleted in decay. During treatment with insulin and fluids, various factors contribute to development of hypokalemia. These include insulin-mediated potassium transport into the cell, resolution of acidosis, which also promotes potassium entry into the cells. So what happens during the stage of ketoacidosis? The potassium is come out. As soon as we start treating and initiate insulin, this potassium from the extracellular space starts entering the cell, and the potassium is likely to fall down. So resolution of acidosis, you will find that there is entry of potassium into the cell and urinary loss of potassium salts or organic acids. Thus potassium repletion should commence as soon as adequate urine output and normal serum potassium are documented. If the initial serum potassium level is elevated, then potassium depletion should be delayed until the potassium falls into the normal range. The inclusion of 20 to 40 milliequivalents of potassium in each liter of IV fluid is reasonable, but additional potassium supplementation may be required to reduce the amount of chloride administered. So potassium phosphate or acetate can be substituted for chloride salts. The goal is to maintain the serum potassium at 3.5 millimoles per liter. So when to stop hourly insulin? Now we have been giving insulin either hourly or we have been giving it initially via infusion. So now the question comes, when are you going to discontinue and come back to the normal way of administering insulin? So when the glucose goal is what is our goal? Goal is to have glucose between 8.3 to 11.1 millimoles per liter, correction of acidosis and negative ketonuria, and patient is able to take orally, he is eating properly, then you have to stop hourly insulin. The complications of treatment: hypokalemia, which lead to cardiac arrhythmias, cardiac arrest, respiratory muscle weakness. So you have to keep a watch on potassium, because managing potassium in diabetic ketoacidosis is very, very important. Then hypoglycemia, if you are not able to, if insulin is administered fast or is showing fast recovery and your patient is on infusion, so there are chances that he may go into hypoglycemia, and especially in those cases where we are giving the longer acting insulin. Overhydration and acute pulmonary edema, if you try to overdo, if you are not careful enough in managing the volume, so volume correction is not proper, then you may, or there is some such condition already existing in the patient's body where you have to be very, very careful in administering the volume. So that may result in overhydration or acute pulmonary edema. Now what happens in children? So the neurological complications, there can also be complications because of the treatment that can result in cerebral edema. So while managing a patient in diabetic ketoacidosis, you have to keep certain things in mind, that you have to, first is you should act fast, try to find out what has triggered in this diabetic ketoacidosis test. We have to take care of that also. The other important thing is to manage the volume and potassium and of course the glucose, and desirable is 250. As long as the ketone bodies are existing, it is not desirable to bring down the glucose to the normal level, but once the ketone is cleared, you can allow the patient, or you can try to bring it down to near normal, and as soon as patient is able to take oral feeds, change over to normal regime of insulin rather than continuous IV infusion. Thank you.